مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. بعد معركة العالمين الثانية قال وينستون تشرشل رئيس الوزراء البريطاني مقولته الشهيرة: هذه ليست النهاية ولا حتى بداية النهاية، لكنها ربما نهاية البداية. في معركتنا القومية ضد كوفيد-19 لم نصل إلى النهاية، ولكن بتلقي 40% من الأميركيين للقاح. لا شك أننا قد تجاوزنا نهاية البداية. غير أن الانتصار في المعركة ضد الفيروس ما هو إلا البداية. أكثر من نصف عدد السكان في بلدنا لم يتلقوا اللقاح بعد، ويرفض عشرات الملايين هذه الفرصة. وفي حين أن الاقتصاد ينمو، فإن الإحصائيات الأخيرة تدل على أنه لا ينمو بالصورة نفسها التي آمل كثيرون أن ينمو بها. إذ نخرج من الجائحة، كيف يؤثر هذا الدور في نهاية النفق على قدرة الرئيس بايدن على ممارسة الحكم؟ هل يمكن أن يستغل نجاحه في الإلقاءات ليحقق أهدافا أخرى مهمة، مثل خطته للبنية التحتية وإصلاح نظام الهجرة وتحسين العلاقات الأمريكية والقوانين الجديدة لمكافحة التغير المناخي؟ هل ستؤركله المخاوف وهواجس بشأن كوفيد؟ هل يتطلق السياسة بالفعل إلى الانتخابات التالية التي يهين موعدها بعد 18 شهرا فحسب؟ لمناقشة أولويات الرئيس بايدن، إذ تحدى المخاوف هي الجائحة، يسرني أن أرحب باثنين من أوسع صحفي واشنطن اطلاعا، ديفيد دراكر وسارة فارس. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. I think that's the light we see at the end of the tunnel, with 40% of Americans now vaccinated and millions more on the verge of getting their second shot, including youngsters now down to the age of 12. Perhaps maybe, just maybe, we've turned the corner on the pandemic. To discuss the implications of this, the political implications for the White House, Congress, and our nation, I'm delighted to welcome David Drucker and Sarah Ferris. Hi, welcome back. Nice to have you both. So if you are at the White House right now, David, how close are we to unfurling the mission accomplished sign on the pandemic?
Well, I don't know if any president's ever going to unfurl a mission accomplished sign ever again. However, I think if you're President Biden, you have to be feeling pretty good about the progress of the project of vaccinating millions of Americans and getting to a point where economies across the country, states, localities, are opening up so that the economy can fully recover and we can all get back to normal. President Biden has been very careful about not over promising and under delivering. So at times he gets a lot of criticism, particularly from the right, naturally, about the decisions he is making. But I think his strategy has been set reasonably big goals, but not too big. Say it's a ways off in the future, but in a future you can all envision that you're going to be around to see, and then let these things come in, under budget and ahead of schedule, if you will, to borrow the phrase. And from the perspective of his pandemic management, which appears in comparison to his predecessor so orderly and so organized and so sort of blandly communicated, I think that is probably why he continues to enjoy pretty healthy approval ratings even after his first days has passed.
And so, Sarah, do you think the president is likely to take a victory lap, as it were, if we hit a certain level of vaccinations? At one point, he had defined July 4th as the as the key date, and then he made maybe Memorial Day a key date. But do you think by July 4th, he might be taking more of a victory lap on this?
I think a lot of congressional Democrats would really like to see him take a victory lap on this. As David said, the response from the White House has been a lot more robust than the previous administration. Democrats say that Biden should take some credit here. He already has pretty high approval ratings historically. There's still a lot of worry in Congress about what exactly happens to these extremely narrow margins in both the House and the Senate. Both chambers are really only a seat or two away from having the control of Congress completely flip. So Democrats would love to see Biden get out there more, take credit for what they see as turning this pandemic around. They say he's been able to rescue the economy. Of course, you could argue that some of that money that's helped the economy came out before Biden took office. It's obviously very complicated, but Democrats would love to see Biden out there much more vocal, going to events. He's still never really had these big in-person events. They would love to see him have a chance to do that and help their chances of getting elected next year.
It's interesting that you both say he has high approval ratings. I did I looked at this historically after 100 days, and his at about 54% were the second lowest of any president since Roosevelt after the 100 days. I guess the bar was lowered considerably by his predecessor, who had by far the lowest, somewhere around 45% maximum. But 54%, I guess, is not bad in the second decade of the third decade of the 20th century.
That's correct, and I just think it's the hyper-partisan nature of our politics. And to be fair, you're right. Comparing him to President Trump, who just had unusually low approval ratings, even though he had such a durable, rather high ceiling or high floor, if you will. But I think given the fact that presidents don't get honeymoons anymore, President Trump didn't have one, President Obama barely had one. And so both sides have now sort of given up on that practice. I think given that kind of environment, when you're above 50%, it gives you a sort of command, at least, of the political environment to be able to try and negotiate deals the way you want them, to push forward unilaterally if you don't like what the other side is offering you. Of course, low approval ratings and a rebuke in a midterm is always just around the corner. And historically, the party in power in the White House loses far more seats than Republicans have to win in order to regain power.
So just a historical note, John Kennedy had the highest approval rating after 100 days, 85%. And that was even after the Bay of Pigs fiasco. Can you imagine any president conceivably today having an 85% approval rating? It's just beyond belief. All right, 54%, looking good. Sarah, do you see this affecting decision-making and priorities on other issues for President Biden?
So I think the end of the pandemic is certainly going to have a huge role in what Biden is able to pursue agenda-wise. He spent the first 100 days of his presidency really laser focused on this. Obviously, the Congress's biggest act so far this year was a $2 trillion pandemic response package. That money it's unfathomable how much money that is. And we're just starting to see it come out into the economy. Of course, many Americans received checks pretty early on. But some of these bigger funds, such as restaurant revitalization, these programs are still just getting underway. There's going to be a massive child tax credit program that doesn't even start until July. So we're just starting to see the trickle of this money coming out, really. But what Biden would love to do is look at some of the things he campaigned on. There are a ton of issues that Democrats have on their to-do list. They would love to see voting rights, gun rights, immigration. These are all things that Democrats have wanted to do for decades. They haven't had power of full control of Washington in more than a decade. Now they're really eager to do something before they lose it again. As we've been talking about, their majority is extremely thin in both chambers. It doesn't take much for at least one of those chambers to slip away next year. So they're hoping to get as much as possible done in the next year.
So when you look at this list of priorities, David, infrastructure, immigration, criminal justice reform, climate change, taxes to pay for all of these things. How does the administration prioritize? What is President Biden's priorities? And then later on in the show, we're going to talk about whether Congress matches up with where the president is on these things.
Well, look, it seems that the president's priorities are, number one, the pandemic and winding that down effectively and successfully, and rebuilding the economy. Right? You do one so that you can do the other. And he seems to be doing those before he puts too much political capital into anything else. And that's probably very good strategy. I think over time, there may be some tension with Democrats in Congress because, look, from my vantage point, they appear to be approaching the first 2 years of the Biden administration as their last 2 years in control. And so rather than trying to produce an agenda that is a little tempered and might help some of their members in tough districts and try and hold on to some of these seats that they're going to need if they're going to pull off a miracle and still be in control in 2023, that would suggest, going a little bit toward the middle and focusing on matters that are less partisan in nature. They may be very worthwhile things, by the way. Being partisan doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong or shouldn't be done, but it's a matter of how voters perceive these items. But they seem to be operating on this is our last chance, let's get it all done, because we won't be able to do it after the midterm elections. And I think Biden, like most presidents, is approaching this more from the perspective of, I have 4 years, what do I do first, what do I do second? So there could be some tension over time with the rush that congressional Democrats are in and the more measured pace that President Biden is proceeding along. And it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, especially because without getting rid of the legislative filibuster in the United States Senate, the 60-vote requirement, most of these things Democrats won't be able to do. And, everybody asked Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia and Senator Kristen Sinema from Arizona, will you get rid of the filibuster? It's like a weekly dog and pony show. And they keep saying, I don't know how many times I have to tell you, I'm not getting rid of the filibuster. So, we'll see how things go.
All right. So when we come back from the break, Sarah, I'm going to ask you whether and how priorities for Congress match up with priorities for the White House and what that means for the next, say, 120 days of our political calendar in just a moment. Of all the duties a president has, one of the most solemn is to award medals of honor, the highest recognition our nation can give for bravery under fire. At a time when we are recoiling from what ill-informed commentators call forever wars, President Biden recently awarded his first Medal of Honor to a veteran of one of our most forgotten wars, what is euphemistically called the police action in Korea that took 33,686 American lives in a bloody conflict in which nearly 5 million died. In this case, the president honored 94-year-old Colonel Ralph Puckett Jr., who entered the ceremony in a wheelchair but stood ramrod straight in his dress uniform to receive recognition from the president. Biden recounted how Puckett braved enemy fire repeatedly as his soldiers took control of Hill 205, frozen high ground 60 miles or so from the Chinese border, checking on his men and redistributing ammunition even after he was wounded. His men loved him. When he ordered them to leave him so they could escape to safety as their hill was being overrun, they refused and risked their own lives to carry him out. There is so much gray in our lives today, with so much skepticism and derision of people in public life. It's moments like these that remind us what service is all about. Again, our guests today include Sarah Ferris. Sarah covers the House of Representatives for Politico, a multimedia platform that is all politics all the time. Her focus is the Democratic Caucus. A native of Newtown, Connecticut, She has also reported for Politico Pro, The Hill, The Washington Post, and the Houston Chronicle. Also joining us today is David M. Drucker. David is the senior political correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Previously, he served as senior editor of CQ Roll Call, an insider newspaper covering Capitol Hill, and as a political reporter for the Los Angeles Daily News, covering politics in his home state of California. So, Sarah, David was explaining that Congress may have a 2-year horizon while the White House has a 4-year horizon. If you're in Congress, what do you want to accomplish, and how fast do you want to do it? What's at the top of your priorities? Let's say you're Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer.
What Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer would love to do right now is pass this infrastructure package. Of course, there is a very long list of things that they have on their to-do list. We can get into that in a little bit. We've mentioned some of them already, but infrastructure to them is the most feasible. Right now, they have a chance of getting bipartisan support, so Republicans might actually sign on to this. If you ask me, I think it's a little bit doubtful. I think there's just too many open questions about what would happen with taxes and spending, and the two parties are just inherently at odds on this. But right now, there's some chance Republicans can get on board. There's also a process that allows Democrats to actually pass this without Republican votes if they want. This is the same way Democrats passed Obamacare. They were able to get this through under the budget rules. So basically, because infrastructure is related to taxing and spending, this is the kind of policy that they can squeeze through under these really restrictive rules. So this is their best shot at getting something done, and they can put a lot of different kinds of programs in there. They're looking to put not just roads and bridges and money for policing and upgrading those, but they'd also love to see money for childcare programs. They'd love to see something like a universal pre-K, money putting into what they're calling human infrastructure. And of course, it's still going to be very difficult. You still need nearly unanimous support from the Democratic Party here, but you don't need Republicans. And the issue with all of the other items on the rest of their list is you will need Republicans. Something like voting rights or something like gun control. These are not issues that can go through these really restrictive budget rules. They're not related to the taxes and spending of the economy. There's just a lot more pressure on them. They'll need to get some sort of a Republican compromise to be able to get this through, unless they do, as David was alluding to, blow up this legislative filibuster, which none of us can really see happening in the next couple of months at least. So right now they're really faced with this dilemma of they want to go forward on infrastructure. They believe they can do that, but the rest of their agenda is pretty locked down because of just the makeup of the Senate right now.
And David, do you think that there will be any Republican support for some of these programs, which sound like they will transcend a partisan divide? Will the Democrats include how to pay for all these things, a tax program as part of this infrastructure package?
Well, Democrats want to raise taxes as a part of the infrastructure package. That's what President Biden wants to do. So they're in lockstep there. The issue is, what kind of a tax increase can you get through the United States Senate in particular? And there are senators from red states, from Republican-leaning states. John Tester in Montana is very concerned about an inheritance tax. Republicans like to call it the death tax, that would hit families who inherit the family farm from relatives, for instance. All of a sudden, they have an asset worth millions of dollars because the land is very valuable, and they're supposed to pay taxes on that, but they're not multimillionaires prepared to pay taxes on an asset like that, and therefore they're forced to sell. So you have John Tester's opposition to that, and he's a pretty loyal liberal Democrat on most pieces of legislation. You've also obviously have Senator Joe Manchin, who has put a limit on the kind of increase in the corporate tax that he would accept. So Democrats are going to have to work out some of their own differences on taxes. There is a chance for bipartisan agreement on policing reform. Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina has been working with Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey, both African Americans, and they believe that they're going to be able to reach a deal, the kind of deal that eluded the Congress last year when President Trump was in office. So that's something we may see. I think the bill known as H.R. 1, which is the election reform bill that Democrats believe is necessary in the wake of the post-election period here in the United States, is going to go absolutely nowhere. Republicans are dead set against almost everything in that bill. And so I think that thing is dead on arrival. But some of these things may find a way to get done. As Sarah said, there's always the budget rule option where you can bypass the filibuster for some spending items.
David Drucker, Sarah Ferris, thank you very much for helping to explain our politics to our friends abroad. In literature and theater, when a character rips his mask off, it usually reveals something you hadn't expected. Thanks to new guidelines from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, tens of millions of Americans are now ripping their masks off. Will they look different than before? Will they see the world differently than before? As the percentages of Americans who've received their double vaccinations climb, and as kids as young as 12 now get their first shots, it's only natural to want to return to normal life as quickly as possible. For many, that's their first days in school, even though the school year has just a few weeks left. For many more, that's their first hug of a grandchild, their first meal in a restaurant. After 14 months of stoically doing as they were told, as though we were on a war footing, America is eagerly looking forward to summer. Vacations, beaches, camps, travel, and, well, fun. But when the masks come off, will we be any different for the experience? Will we see the world differently? Both the world close to home and the world further away. How will the COVID experience change the way we see healthcare, both in terms of risk and in terms of access to care? Personally, I hope this ends the debate about whether all Americans should have health insurance, crystallizing discussion on the questions of how and how to pay for it. How will COVID change the way we see work? I hope it raises the value in our eyes of the women and men who provide the basic logistical services of life, grocery workers, delivery people, while at the same time fueling our imaginations about our own work environments. There is great value in the human interaction we find in the office, and there is great value in the independence and self-reliance we've had at home. A hybrid system is in our future. How will COVID change our view of technology? Zoom is now a part of life. As we've all learned, it has enormous benefits as well as profound weaknesses, and sometimes embarrassing complications. I think we should embrace the technology, recognizing its advantages and its limitations. How will COVID change our place in the world? As the chasm widens between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, and as large countries like India face horrible outbreaks of the virus, let's remember that we were once in their shoes with the worst COVID statistics in the world, the country whose citizens no one wanted. It's both right and smart to share our vaccine bounty as widely as possible. These are just a few of the questions we will face in a post-COVID world. When the masks come off, I hope it reveals the best face of Americans. بهذا نصل نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول أولويات الرئيس بايدن خلال ثاني 100 يوم له، أرجو أن تتواصلوا معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاغ Inside Washington أو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. سأراكم الأسبوع المقبل، وإلى أن ألقاكم شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.